Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1245. So context. Context is we've been discussing the development of emotions and cognitive faculties, and particularly in context of Avodas Hashem, how we grow in our relationship with God from a behavioral, natural place to more defined emotions, more cognitively driven emotions, which are guided by and tamed and trained by the emotions, till we get to a much more cognitive experience, which is obviously a higher level, because it's not defined by the subjective emotions. And he spoke about Chitzenis HaMeichin, outer dimension of Meichin, where you're contemplating, firstly, how God is necessary in your life. He sustains you, Chayecha, and is your father, etc. Then how God, the contemplation, how God is not defined, not in juxtaposition to us, but God as He is the creator of everything and beyond, and everything is just a reflection of Him. And then till we get to a place where the divine that's completely beyond existence. And they define the difference between Bina and Chochmah, where Bina is still a yesh and still relates to the emotions, and Chochmah is able to go and be absorbed by the divine experience that's beyond us completely, where we experience a higher consciousness, a higher state of reality. And that too carries the emotions to that point, as we learned. Then we continued in discussing that there's one more element that's necessary, and that's the yichud, the union between Chachma and Bina as a zivuk shalom, a complete union, and that gazes at arich and experiences the forehead, like the determination, even though we may not understand the reasoning behind it, the seichel behind it, but Chachma and Bina, which is seichel gali, revealed cognitive skill, is able to experience something that's beyond the superconscious. And that in turn draws the energies from Pnimius Atik. And then that on one hand feeds the emotion. The emotions now have been lifted to that place, but because emotions are actually rooted in a deeper place than the Meichin in Atik, they in turn give something back to Chachma and Bina, especially Bina. And that's what he explains, Shlach Tishlach Es HaEim, that the mother, which is Bina, the mother of the Frechim, of the chicks, of the offspring, which are the Midas, gets elevated through these Midas as they are elevated. So essentially the entire psyche, the entire person, both emotions and the cognitive, are now elevated to a far higher place, where the etzem of Bina, not as mother, as Bina relates to its children, meaning that Bina is taking care of and descending and hovering over and protecting its emotions, but the other way around, that Bina is being carried by these more mature emotions to higher places. And what is that higher place? He defined it as being the level of Bachol, of Haftas Hashem Elokecha B'chol Ma'idecha. That not just is it a love of godliness and God on the level of B'chol Nafshecho, B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, which is still contained by the person, but Ma'idecha Bligvul, basically beyond our structure. So in the Ava itself, there's 3 levels: B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Ma'idecha, as he explained at the top of page 1242, that B'chol Avavcha is with your heart, that the heart is filled with this, but it still contains the love. It's not overwhelmed by it. B'chol Nafshecha, the Ava fills all the Keiches HaNefesh, that's called Nafshecha, all the faculties, and that still is containable and something we can relate to. That's already a level, that you cannot contain it. So basically you get absorbed in it, completely nullified in this deeper level of higher love that reaches this higher states. Okay. So then, that presents a question. The question is, Bina seems to be defined by structure. Bina has parameters, hasaga. B'chol meidecha is bligvul, l'mayla metam v'das. So though it does say in Zohar that Bina is the level of b'chol meidecha, but how do you explain it? Second question, I'm reading from page 1243. The second question is, even that level of ava that you said that turns the person, like he says, aziras garmei, like you're completely nullified. Because when you're in the presence of something so great, you become like nothing in your own eyes. He says, doesn't that seem to contradict the very definition of b'chol meidecha is more expansive? It's even greater than b'chol nafshecho, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. Not more diminished, but greater, more expansive. Those were the two questions. To answer that is he began to explain that in b'chol meidecha itself, there are two levels, an inner and an outer level. And what are those? Chitzenis and primis. What are those? That's like in a koel poshut that we have in a voice. We have a voice and sound. You have a voice and sound that has words. So that's expressive, and that means it's defined. As soon as you have words, it means seichel is going lefi hakavana, like he said, the kavana haseichel. The words he used were masagas haseichel. I was looking for a particular expression. So it's a defined expression of sound with words based on a logical and a comprehension. Then there's kol pashut. That's a cry. Now, in a cry itself, there are two levels: a cry with a sound and a soundless cry. A cry with a sound is, yes, deeper than a cry than speaking with words because it doesn't have words, but it's still, he says, a reflection from the etzem hanefesh. Whereas the dibur, kol b'dibur, is not a reflection; it's already an expression in a defined state. It's a reflection, ma'atzmis hanefesh. But im kol zeh harirak ha'ora hamispashet. It's only a reflection. And that's why it still has some connection to the klei halev, to the containers of the heart, that he cries out with sound, a lot of sound, loud, and a very strong expression. But then this tzaikas halev, a cry from the heart. A little later, he's going to refer to what we read on Rosh Hashanah, Chana, when she spoke in the Haftarah. We read about how Chana went to pray for a child, and her lips were moving, but there was no sound. He's going to compare it to that level. I don't know if we'll get there, but I'm mentioning it's on page 1146. He already mentions that. But okay, so there's no sound, and this why? Because it touched the person so deeply that he can't even express himself in a sound, even a cry. Rather, it's an inner cry. And he gave, sadly, a very painful example that something when a person has a tsar pnimi, a very internal tragedy or trauma or pain, it's negei be'etzma nefesh, and not due to something outside of him. It touches him at his very core, to the point, he can't cry at all. To the point that, like someone who faints from deep pain and deep anguish, and there's no way to revive him except with great effort, and even then, he faints again because he's unable to deal with and cope with what happened. That's how deeply it's affected him, which means it's not expressing itself through crying out loud. The opposite, it silences him. He completely is lost in shock, if you wish. He doesn't say that word, but he does say hazaza, like hazazas atzmus hanefesh, which you could say is a shock. Hazaza means movement, it could be shaken up, but shock may be the best word here. So it does not express itself like the first level of the koil. It's without words, but at least it's expressed. You hear something. You hear a sound. You hear a loud sound. Here, that's where we stopped. So now he's going to compare these two levels to two levels in B'chol Meidecha. Okay. But before we continue, let me just say one more thing I wanted to just say. What did I want to say? Oh, in looking up the sources for this piece, which I actually found, it's interesting. I think that Tzemach Tzedek brings it, but he doesn't bring this example of Tsar. Oh, no, I'm sorry. In the Maimer in Tafresh Tzadik Hey, Tsoya Tasel Teva. Tzadik Hey would be the year 1934. Noyach. The Friedrich Rebbe discusses this a little more at length. And interestingly, he does not bring Tsar Pnimi. He brings an example there, if I recall correctly, of tshuva or something like that. He doesn't talk about something. For some reason, it seems like this was very relevant at the time, that the Rebbe Rasha brought a very strong example like this. And I mentioned it's not so common that he would speak in such a person fainting to the extent he can't be revived. So it could have been that maybe there was something related at the time when he wrote this that may have been relevant. Friedrich Rebbe changes the example to something that is much more, say, milder, but not as intense, just as a footnote. Okay. Now, maybe someone has a question. I would go right now to explain now the two levels. Now that he's going to talk about the hafta b'chol moedecha. But in case somebody wants any clarity about what I said so far, please, this is a good time. And if not, I'll just read on here on page 1245, the new paragraph. And you can find the pages at ayinbeis.com. And similarly, we'll understand, Gamkein will also understand, in the love that we call unbound, unlimited love. The general difference between the love of the first two statements, with all your heart, with all your nefesh, with all your spirit, and the difference between that to love with all your might or with all your all, even ba'an, ma'id means very much, meaning beyond your containers, as we said. It says the general difference is the Beis Avis Hanal, the first two loves of b'chol levavcha and b'chol nafshecha, with all your heart and with all your soul or spirit, hein sheboim rak min hatam v'aseichel. They come strictly and only from tam and seichel. In other words, there's a reason and an intelligence that's driving that love. V'hainu she'ein ze b'chinas ha'ava atzmis shebenefesh. It's not referring to b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha, a core love in the soul of the person. In other words, we're not talking about awakening the very essential love that every neshama has to God. That's a different level, which we'll talk about. Rather, this is one that makes sense. It's based on logic, based on a contemplation. Either what contemplation? Ki'im, rather, this love, it comes due to the seichel compelling, making a strong case. Chiyuv HaSeichel means the seichel is as a compelling case for this love, that compels one to love God. Well, let me read it a little, the song. Rather, due to the compelling case of seichel that compels this love, because of that, that's the reason he awakens in love. His love is stimulated or aroused. In other words, you take away the tam and the seichel, he would not be in that state of love. So what does it mean, tam v'seichel? So we learned earlier, just to bring out some examples. A person could, for example, have a fundamental love every child has to its parent. By nature, biologically. This is wired within us. However, that love is not always expressed, and very often is concealed. However, when the child is thinking, look what my father did for me, and my mother did for me. They brought me up, they sustained me, they protect me. then that awakens a love. Now, even though there's a core love within, but this love that we're talking about is being stimulated is coming due to a particular reason. Something happens, something conscious, something tangible. Same thing with Hashem. We're not talking about the core Ava Mesuteres that we discussed, the very core love of a neshama to Elokus. That when you think about the greatness of God, it's like the Rambam says, just the grandeur, it brings you to a level of, wow, this is something quite attractive, something beautiful to be drawn to. Even more than just the beauty of a nice song or of a nice painting. Now, if when you think about how God sustains you, when we say, for example, when we bench, you are fed, you have health. There's plenty to bless and plenty to have reason to love God because He gives you life. That comes through a cognitive process. That's what he says, b'chol levavcha. Now he's going to distinguish between b'chol levavcha and b'chol nafshecho. B'chol levavcha, so what's the difference between the first? We didn't get back to b'chol moedecha yet. B'chol levavcha hu sha'ah vehi mugbeles b'klei halev levad, like we learned earlier, previous page. And b'chol levavcha, the love is still contained, the parameters or the containers of the heart alone. In other words, it's not affecting the rest of the person's being. The heart feels attracted, a love, a connection. Ubechol nafshecha, which is the next step, that love now extends and expands into all the faculties of the nefesh. What does that mean? How does love is an emotional experience? What does it mean, the other faculties? So he says, Ukamoi harotz lidvar mitzvah. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos to run. You should run to a mitzvah. You shouldn't just walk, you should run. So what does that mean? Because the love that a person has affected his other faculties. He's actually running. When you love something, there's one thing you can have love in your heart and sit at your table and think about it or feel it. But then there's another level. The level is that actually affects your faculties, that a person runs the Dvar Mitzvah, or Kahai Gavna. And similarly, like etc. Similarly. Shazel Mitzad Geidel Ahavase B'Yeser. That is due to his increased level of love. So in other words, B'chol Nafshecho itself, B'chol Levavcha itself could impact that you are drawn to godliness and you're passionate about it and you're excited, but doesn't necessarily affect your faculties. Here, the love has become to the extent b'chol nafshecha that affected all your faculties. Like it says elsewhere, hamoshel al zeh. Elsewhere, it gives an example for this. Like a river, so a river is running, but then a river could overflow and extends al kol gedesav all the way to the very banks of the river. Like you see, when a river has its regular flow, sometimes when it's raining or some other reason, the river expands. All the gedesav are the edges, are essentially the banks of the river. He says exactly because of either ribuy hakshamim, much rain, v'afsharas shlogim, and the melting down of snow. So both those things can cause the river to fill up. Like when a river floods, here he's not saying flooding, but it extends the river all the way to the banks of the river, to the capacity that the river can flow. So he says that's an example. The river itself, when it's flowing regularly, is like the love of B'chol Levavcha. And same thing, when there's the Nafshecho, a person's they're using their intelligence, bonus, and contemplating in an increased way in the heart, that'll cause that the love will become more excited and more expansive than in a regular state. So the example is the river. That's b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. So in other words, there's two levels in love. V'afta b'chol levavcha, v'afta b'chol nafshecha. But they're both, as we're going to see in a moment, both still within the riverbanks. The third level, we're not discussing an ava that's coming due to a logical and cognitive contemplation. This is ava atzmi shebenefesh. This is not due to the seichel making a case for it and compelling you to feel love because you contemplated and it brought you to love. But the soul itself desires godliness because it's one with it. So there we're talking now that B'chol Meidech is touching the part that's an example I gave with the child, the biological connection. Not just because something there's a reason for it, even without reason, doesn't have any reason. Commission is bar ill, as was explained earlier, Dibra Maskul Vayetze Yaakov. The Maimer Vayetze Yaakov, where he says below in volume 2, he discussed that. So that's how he explains the difference. Now, in B'chol Meidecha, now he's going to explain 2 different levels. But let me stop here if anybody has any questions. Clear? Okay, so now he says, V'yesh b'zeh beis madregis. In this level, B'chol Meidecha itself, there's 2 levels. Like he said at the beginning of the last paragraph on the last page. Hamadrega achas, the first level is this. Hu kasher hu betekef, these aispilus benefesh b'tzemoyin godel, is when this love is intense. The aispilus benefesh, and the excitement of the soul in this love, enraptured, you can say, is b'tzemoyin godel, with great thirst, lihicholel, lihichlol, ba'atzmus eidin sev baruch hu, sharshe mekere, to be encompassed.
He's talking about B'chol Moedcha now, the base madregos.
Yeah. That the first level is that it's very intense, and the excitement in the heart is with a deep thirst, with a great thirst, to be encompassed in Atzmis Erein Sof, Baruch Hu Sharshe Mekere, its root and source. Remember, this is not due to a logical process. This is that you've reached a point where you can feel that godliness is your source. And therefore, there's this great thirst to be encompassed in it. And this is aspilus, this excitement is revealed in the heart. You feel it tangibly. 1 minute. I'm trying to understand the distinction a minute. I think I got it, but I just want to make sure I'm right. 1 second. Okay, let me explain it before you read it inside, based on the other Maimorim on this topic. Here's the story. It's a little subtle differences here. So we've established what means ava that's based on comprehension, contemplation. This is not connected to the very core love that everyone is born with, because what everyone's born with, it doesn't need contemplation. It's the way we are. This is talking about a mature adult who has a mind and learns Chassidus and has his bonus and contemplates on godliness, and that awakens a love. And that love is bizgalus belibe. Not only belev, that's b'chol avavcha, but also b'chol nafshecho, like the river spreads out, and it causes him to run to do a mitzvah and many other things. His whole being basically is impacted by that love. Like, even in relationships, you could say, b'chol avavcha, you can love someone, but it hasn't affected your head from head to toe. You love someone, but you're not necessarily acting, or your whole body, your whole being, all your faculties are involved in it. Your faculties are involved. So it's a very revealed form of love. Then there's what we have, we're fundamentally wired. Every neshama, like he starts speaking in Tanya, Perek Yud Ches, and on. So he starts talking about the love that everyone has, the etzem. It's like what I said before, a child has a natural love to a parent, and a parent to a child. This is unchangeable. This is not based on logic. It's not based on understanding. It doesn't need, the logic, we'll talk a minute about how you get that awakened. It's there, it's within every one of us. Now, obviously in Avodas Hashem, you want both. Because the first one has the Maila that it came through your effort and through your contemplation, and it's revealed in you. The second one has the Maila that it's your core being. But the downside is it can remain concealed and dormant for years. Your core being, we have parents and children who love each other, but they don't act on it. They could even be estranged from each other. That doesn't take away the Ava Atzmis, but in Begoli it's not there, which can be quite, it's not small matter. Just giving an example. You could have the Eibishter and the Eden, they could love each other, but then there's a Golus, where the love is concealed. Haster Aster Ponai. Moshe Rabbeinu had to beg God for 80 days to reconnect. The whole story of what we are right now in the month of El leading to Yom Kippur, where Moshe finally gains Salachti Kidvrach. The Ava was there, but it wasn't revealed. So you really want both. Now, here's the thing. In B'chol Meidecha itself, because it's at the core of who we are, the question is, how do you stimulate it? So Chassidus says, as he's going to say here, and this is based on also another Maimorim that this is discussed, you need hasbonus also, but the hasbonus is not to create the love, it's to reveal the love. That's the difference. In b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecho, you need to create it. So you need contemplation. In the b'chol meidecha, there's a level where you also need his bonus, but this bonus is just to remind you of the love that you already have. And that is his bonus in haflos ein sof. It's not due to you lacking something. It's not because God is doing something for you. No, because we're talking about an atzmis love. It's not because he's doing something for you. That's already a connection that's based on a utilitarian connection, so to speak. God does this, so you love him for that. He gives you life. Chayecha, he's your father. And again, I'm not talking about father and son, the atzmi. We're talking about recognizing that he is your father, so you have a closeness to him on a revealed level. Here we're talking about atzmi, so the way to reveal it is not because of a need, but when you start thinking about haflos ein sof, it touches that core part inside of you, and that's the first level of b'chol meidecha. So he's going to distinguish between his galus belibe of b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha is also revealed in your heart, but it's not the core of the love. It's the love felt in your heart due to essentially something that caused it to be there. Now, of course, you can make the argument, one second. When I think that God provides for me and he gives me life and sustenance, even though it's logical, why is that not revealing the very core of who you are? So number one is, not in these Maimorim, there may be a connection there, but the main point is there, it's not based on that core connection. There it's based on whatever it is that's happening, that God is serving us in a certain way. It's still about you. Whereas B'chol Meidecha is about God. That's the key difference. In B'chol Cholavcha Chol Nafshecha, the Maila is that you're contemplating and you come to it through your efforts. The downside is it's ultimately about you. It's about your lev and your nefesh that loves that thing. So your I would say ego, but your identity is involved in it. In the third level, we're going to learn it's not about your identity. It's about the very essence of who you are as you're connected to God. It's not about you in any way. Yes, it's true, you're connected to godliness, but that's the connection dominates, not what your identity benefits from. So that's what he's going to say in his Galus Alev. Therefore, there's his Galus Alev of B'chol Levavcha B'chol Nafshecha, and there's his Galus Alev that comes B'chol Meidecha through this contemplation. I just wanted to say this because reading it can be a little confusing. So let me read it inside now. So he says, "Vayispail shu bizgalus alev, v'lo shu b'chinas murgish kamei ba'av v'yira bizgalus alev." It's not that it's felt in a very tangible way, like the av v'yira bizgalus alev that comes through contemplation. Adarabah, with b'chol ma'adecha b'chinas bittul b'tachlis. He's in a state of complete nullifications, completely sublimated. And nevertheless, he is definitely in a stimulated state in a revealed way, which means that his nefesh is extending and revealed. Internally and inwardly, he's madish me'ed. He's very excited. He's making a big ruckus. Ukamoi tzamalacha nafshi, like we say, tzamalacha nafshi. My spirit, my soul thirsts toward you. Kamalacha psari, and my flesh is melts, or what do we say? Kama is dissolved. So this is the level of
longing, deep longing, not dissolving. Simoin adir.
Okay. So my soul thirsts to you, and my flesh longs, deep longing. This is not coming because he feels he's constrained or in some type of distress or in a limited sense, in some way in a distressed state. Due to the hergish of Ein Sof, he feels the divine infinite, feels it in his nefesh. From that comes the great thirst. So you could have thirst, like he talks about Baal Tshuva, like he speaks in Tanya, chapter 7, that because he was so distant from God and didn't have water all his life, or for a long period of time, he's thirsty because of lack. Then there's another level of tzamalacha nafshi. It's a longing due to not lack, but due to the revelation of something. It's such a deep revelation that the nefesh itself completely thirsts, and the flesh longs to be in a very passionate way. So this is revealed in the person. It's not silent. However, it's not this galus belibay of a regular love that comes due to a contemplation, the one we talked about before, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecho. V'hu lamayla metam v'das, and this is beyond tam v'das. You call that supra, beyond knowledge, not lower than knowledge. Lamayla metam v'das. Say super conscious is also
suprarational.
Suprarational, yeah. Completely legamri. The mind is completely not involved in this process. In the first two levels, the mind is absolutely involved. It's what's compelling the case for it. You have a very good reason to love something, and therefore you pursue it and you love it. The difference is it affecting only your heart or your whole being, all your faculties? B'chol ma'adecha has nothing to do with the mind. It's to do with who you are, your very essence of your being that now has been stimulated. And you feel it, but the feeling is one of being completely sublimated or subsumed in the source. That's the type of thirst that it is. I mean, a flame, when a flame gets closer to its mother flame, which actually is an example for where we are now in these days, starting Rosh Hashanah, says Tshuva, where the kiruv hamoyer el anitzutz. So the flame feels the mother flame. You see flame, they start being drawn to each other. That's not due to thirst. That's due to love. There's a thirst if the flame is here and it feels that it's distant from its source. So there's a certain thirst that comes from distance. But there's a thirst that comes from closeness, that you're so much connected that when you get close to it and you feel it, you're consumed with this being drawn to it and being encompassed in that source. Now, of course, it's hard for us to really fully relate to this, except logically, because it's a level that you have to be on this level to understand it, because it's an experience, not just words, not just ideas. So we'll talk about that more once we get but first we have to understand it. So ironically, we are using our seichel to understand something that's beyond seichel. But that's why I'm giving these examples for it. Or let's talk another example, a very human example. It could be a person loves another person. Let's say two people, two spouses. Or it could be a friend, or it could be a child. There's a love that you feel when you're thousands of miles away, and you suddenly remind yourself of the person you love. So you're very much, you feel a longing inside you. But that's a longing that comes from distance. And then let's talk scenario 2. You now meet them after, let's say, a year or a month or a week, whatever it may be. Longer the better, in a sense, for the purpose, the mashal that I'm giving. You suddenly come to them, you meet with them, you see them. What happens then? The love gushes over completely. You hug the person, and you're longing to connect. You lose yourself in this. In the other one, he said, it's a matter of a longing that comes from a distance. Like he said, Ein min ha-mitzah. Here you're talking about you're with that person, so you completely lose yourself in this experience. That's the bittul betachlis that he's talking about. So it's not based on a logical love where, okay, you did something for me, now I meet you, and I respond, I thank you, I express love to you for what you've done for me. Here you're talking about two people who are fundamentally connected, so they can long for each other from a distance, like like min ha-meitzar, or you're in a state of distance or you're in a state of distress and you want to be with the person you love. Or it comes when you're close to that person, so it also expresses itself. You don't take it for granted, but it's a very different type of experience. That's what he's referring to here. And there's no taruvas hamechin klal, because it's due to the very core love. The ima yes, now he qualifies. They say this nasai day is bonanus. And even though this stimulation comes through contemplation, because as I said earlier, how do you get to this place? It's concealed within you. So you need something to awaken it. So he's saying now, it comes through his bonus, the zesha inus of nirgish b'nafshe, that very fact that inus of should be felt by you requires not why his bonus b'haflos ein sof baruch. So that is the catalyst, the contemplation on the awesomeness, because in the example I gave, it's a physical human beings. Here they were distant, or one was in distress and reached out, or called out, min ha-meitzah karashika, and then you're close to that person. But how does that mean closeness with godliness? How do you get close to God? So there's his bonus. That's not about his bonus that's creating a love. It says bonus to make you aware of your connection. So you need some bonus because you need something to get you to feel that godliness is part of who you are. That would be the difference. The first one, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecho, there the contemplation is creating the love, giving birth to it. Like we've learned, gives birth to it. Here we're talking about giving birth. We're talking about just stimulating something that's inside of you that you're not aware of right now. So that's the bonus b'aflos ein sof. It ain't sof. That's essentially that's what causes you to feel that godliness. Acharotze hu mitzad rotza nefesh mitzad atzma. But the yearning and the longing is not coming due to the contemplation. The contemplation is just making you aware of the ein sof that is that you're connected with. That nigers benafshe. It should be felt. But the rotze, the yearning, the longing, the love is coming from the rotze nefesh mitzad atzma. He's qualifying because he just said it has no taruvis. There's no mix of seichel altogether. So how could you say that when we know there is a seichel being involved? So he says the seichel is not a mix in the longing. It's only awakening the connection. Now you're aware of godliness in your presence. So then what takes over is your natural longing, only due to the Ratzon itself. Ratzon HaNefesh itself. I guess he means Vayetze Yaakov. Yeah. It would be good to look it up. I'll look it up a little later. Like it explains there. The etzamai spilus and the very core excitement, hirak belev, the aim bezet taruvas hamechin klal. Repeats it again. And the very excitement itself is not due to the seichel. The seichel just made you aware that it would be like we've talked about this. Imagine you're sitting near the person you love most in the world, but you're sitting with your back to them, or you don't see them for some reason. Your eyes are closed. Someone comes over and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, by the way, you're sitting near the person you love most." So what happens? Suddenly you get taken by this excitement. The person who made you aware is just an outside catalyst, just reminding you, letting you know. But what's the excitement itself, the longing and everything that comes, once you're made aware, it takes over, and that's the thing that's driving force. In the first B'chol Nafshecho, there, the whole midah the love wouldn't be there unless you contemplate. Because you're not talking about the core connection. So the contemplation leads to something.
Something's here. Pizza. Should I get it?
That's what he's saying here. I think that's a good example, actually. So there's the spalus is Agdelev. The aim is that tarufas mechin klal. Hamechin klal. The mind, the person who made you aware of it is not part of the process. You thank him for making you aware, but it's not do that. But that doesn't add or subtract to the love that's being experienced. V'hainu. This means the b'shasei spilus. This means that during the actual stimulation, arousal, and excitement, it doesn't have any effect of moichin at all. It's only the heart itself. That the heart is longing and increasingly thirsty and very thirsty. I'm going to read till the end of the paragraph, then I'll stop if anyone wants to ask anything. And this does not add anything in Meichin because it's completely separate track. This is not a cognitive philosophical process. This is a completely separate track, so it doesn't add any eretz in Meichin. Rak, the only thing he qualifies, it's only afterwards, after the rotzai, this yearning and longing, when you come back and bring it back down, that will create a taste for seir, an additional energy in energizing the mind. It's qualifying. It's not like it's not going to have impact on you. But the impact during this state of yearning and longing has nothing to do with the mind. It's a completely emotional thing. And afterwards, it will have an effect on the meichin. This too needs explanation, but let me just continue reading. And this love, this is b'chol moedcha, the first b'chol moedecha, the first level. Hagamshu b'primis hanefesh, though it's in the inner part of the soul, ein zeh b'chinas atzmis hanefesh. This is not the core soul. Kim ba'oris atzmis hanefesh, only a reflection. He's comparing this to the sound, the shapeless sound, the koil poshet, the cry that doesn't have words. B'chol avavcha b'chol nafshecho is based on words and seichel. It has a logical structure. He's talking about the cry, but the cry is still not the very core essence. And that's why there's an expression. He said clearly, you feel it. You're feeling this love and it's just not connected to intelligence because it's based on your core connection. But it's not, so it's a reflection of atzmis hanefesh. The v'hainu, b'chitzeni is the haratzna atzmi shebenefesh. So in the ratzon atzmi in the nefesh, there's the chitzenius of the ratzon atzmi. There's an outer dimension. Valkein hu belev bulvad. That's why it's only in the heart. Ki mokim is galus haratzon b'primis halev. I assume he means lev levad, only the heart, not the mind, because the place that the ratzon reveals itself is in the inner part of the heart. Yeah. And since ratzon, which is like the metzach, He's talking Aveda, the Metzach, which is the forehead. That's the desire. The desire and the desire to connect to godliness that's beyond Seichel. That's why it's in the heart and not in the mind. Okay, that's the first level of B'chol Me'edecha. It's a little complicated. But let me stop. If anybody wants to ask anything, to clarify, I need to learn it myself again to understand this clearly.
It is a little complicated. Yes. It is a little complicated, yeah.
Yeah, because you see, we're so not used to loving God that when the Rebbe Rashab starts making these distinctions, it's hard to really understand because we try to find an example inside of us. But are there any specific questions anybody has? I understand the whole thing needs explanation. I got that. I will definitely work on it. But anything specific? I mean, this is very much, you need a lot of hergish here, because this is not so much a mathematical formula. It's like different levels of connection. I mean, I will say this, I think it's important to say, it'll just maybe help understand it a bit. Because the first question that seems to jump out at us is, what is this difference between the love of God that comes through Seichel, B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshecho, and the love of God that comes through our very being, connected with Eibush? Or to put it in different words, when we learn in Tanya till chapter 17, till chapter and the end of 16. So we learn about a lot of moich shalat al alev, how through contemplation you can come to control your emotions of the animal soul, and therefore serve God. The Beinani karev elecha davar ma'ed, because moich is in your control, where a person naturally has the ability to self-control. Why doesn't he bring there the idea that we're fundamentally connected to God? Because he's talking the first stage in our lives. Obviously, a neshama is rooted, it says in Ayin Beis and Tanya, chelik elikam mal mamash, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. So our very soul is connected to God. The thing is, that soul came down below, and it spread out and branched out, and it was mislabish in a guf and nefesh abamis, in a body and an animal soul. So its core connection is concealed from us, from our consciousness. So when we're born right now, you and I, we live in this world, you don't feel your core connection to God most of the time. There are moments like he says later in Tanya. It could be Yom Kippur, it could be in the middle of a day, a person can just cry because they feel something. But generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, we don't feel that love. That's why we have to work on it. That's why there's a mitzvah. You wouldn't need a mitzvah. You don't need to be told, for example, love to eat, or love your children, or love your wife, or your spouse. Why? Because it's natural. You feel it. The natural love for God, the Eibishter made an effort, tzimtzum, harishin, and other tzimtzumim, that we shouldn't feel the natural love. So there are things we feel, things we don't feel. Later, after Perek Zayin and on, there he starts explaining that Be'etzem, every Jew, even a Kal Shebekalim, has a nefesh, it's connected to, and therefore there's a fundamental Ava Mesuteres. So Be'etzem, there is that connection. So I think the first thing is to realize that for us to begin our work, we have to start with the Haftas Hashem Lekecha. You can't jump to B'chol Ma'odcha, my core connection. You have to first create something on your terms that you can love. How do you begin? By contemplating on things that bring love. I mean, that's what the Rambam basically says. Heich ha'odam yovei la'avosei li'yirasei. How do you come to love and awe? Kishmiz beinen b'gdulosei. You start thinking about, you see nature, you see the beauty, the eloquence, the coordination, life. I mean, everything that we see that can awaken a love. The Maggid asked the question, how could there be a mitzvah in V'hafta? How could you have a mitzvah in a hergish belev? Either you feel or you don't feel. You can't regulate emotions. You could tell somebody, give tzedakah. Doesn't matter whether you like it or you feel it or you don't feel it. It's a mitzvah, maisis. But how could you regulate emotions? So his answer is, his bonus. The mitzvah is lizbeinen in things that things that will bring you to love. So Chassidus asked the question, so then the mitzvah should have said, lizbeinen. Why does it say v'ahavta? So Chassidus answers, because when there's his bonus, it's automatically going to bring. It's like a natural thing. It's going to, his bonus will always give that. So it's not like a separate mitzvah to be mizbeinen, and that will bring love. What does v'ahavta mean? To come to Ava, you need your mind to help you appreciate that love. But that's on a level where we begin our Avodah. Ultimately, the goal is to reveal the core connection that's concealed. Now, that core connection is not based on Seichel. So the only thing Seichel is used for is to be a catalyst to make you aware of it. But once you have After B'chol Avavcha and After B'chol Nafshecho, then you are consciously much more primed and ready. Now you could say, let's move a step further. Through his bonus and haflas Ein Sof, being aware that God is now really more than just, like he says in Tanya, Perigimel, there's Mamala Kalam, Sevav Kalam, then it's Kula Kamle Kalachashiv. Now you come to realize, 1 second, I'm one with God. It's not just that God created me and I've come to learn that he's my creator. But now you actually come to learn that we're one, like Bonim Atem, you're actually revealing the Chelik Elekam and Mal Mamish now. He doesn't say these words here, but that's the content. You're revealing the very core of Bonim Atem Lashem Alekechem. That's not based on Seichel. In Ayin Beis and Tanya, he doesn't say it's a logical thing. That's how we are. By Yipach Ba'apam Nishmas Chaim, the Neshama inside of you is God's breath. B'teichiyuseh. All the examples he gives them, Machshavte Ritzeineh, like Tipas Mayachav, just like a child comes from the very core essence of the father's seed, the father's nefesh. But you can't get there if you don't first deal with the lower levels, because the neshama is concealed within us. So the lower levels deal with our faculties. So our faculties, well, starting with the lev, you feel some love. That love then affects all your faculties. That's b'chol nafshecha. Now you're ready to go to a next level of appreciating that God is actually one with you. Not just that he's something that's good for you, but he's actually one with you. And that requires awareness of our flaw, Seir Ein Sof. But then Moichin is not involved. The Moichin is just meant to get your attention, so to speak. It's meant to remind you or meant to make you aware of something. And then the experience is completely in Lev, and that, of course, is a whole new level of passion, Rotsei, Simoyin, because you're feeling that you're coming home, so to speak, to your very essence, not just God as an outside entity that has created you and gives you gifts and blessings and life and so on. But now you're coming home. That's a very deep, passionate thing, but it's only in the Lev and not in the Moyach. And it's felt, and he calls that the lower level of B'chol Moedecha. It's not the very essence, because when you literally become one with the essence, which is going to be the next section, the second level, like Tzaikas Halev, not Tzaikas HaKoil, that the cry from the heart, then we're going to be in a place where you're so much connected, there's not even any excitement involved, because it's completely silent. It's like completely uniting with your loved one. That's going to be the next level that he's going to talk about. So this level is a level of bittul, but there's gilui, there's ispashtus, which means, like he says, like the lev is bispilus, so he says these words. What's the word he used?
Haispilus is galus balev.
Right, there's galus balev, but there's another word he used. I'm trying to find it. Because you're feeling alive, you're feeling like you're coming home, you're feeling connected. So it's an expansive experience in that sense. However, it's not based on moichin, So therefore, it's not connected to letters or words like psychus ha, like not psyche, like dibur. So this is psychus hakol, but with sound. And the next level we're going to learn is that psychus hakol without sound. Psychus halev without sound.
This is psychus halev without sound.
What we just learned? No.
Yeah.
No. He says, ha'ara atzmis, mamish the words by psychus hakol. This is psychus hakol, not psychus halev. The next level is going to be psychus halev. Okay. Now the difference is that when you when you call out with words, the words are defined by, like he said, you're contemplating, and it's coming out in an expressive way with words. That's b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecho. Then comes a level there's no words. It's coming from the core of who you are, but it's only a reflection of that core. So there's a sound, and that sound is the sound of the person experiencing. It's like you're excited when you come home and you meet your loved one. There's a palpable excitement involved. I'll read the next Ayin Beis, next paragraph. And the second level of B'chol Moedecha, he kasher ha'ava, he be'emek nekudas ha'nefesh. That the love is in the depths of the inner, more core of the nefesh, b'chinas ava atzmis mamish. Shekol atzmuse bezeh. This is called ava atzmis mamish. This is a very, very core love. His whole core essence is in it. And this Seiris Ava comes through immersion and concentration, the depths of the mind. Oh boy. I'm just looking at it quickly because I see this is not so simple at all. Okay. Okay. Need again explanation before we continue. Rabbi Rashab is introducing a lot of new things here.
This is very deep, very deep.
Yeah.
It's actually Nafshecho is not even a psychus hakoil.
I think it's dibur. It's kela dibur, based on what we're learning here. It seems pretty clear. The comparison is clear. B'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha is the kel b'dibur al pi haseichel. Said clearly, al pi haseichel, al pi kavonas haseichel. B'chol moedecha, the first level is going to be psychus hakoil, and the higher level is going to be psychus halev, where there's no sound at all. He says it at the end of the paragraph. Look on page 1246. He says it befedish. Kasher b'chinas primis hazeh b'chashoyi, please galus klal. This is what I think he's saying here. I just read quickly because it's hard to read without reading on. He says the following. The quality of the first b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha is that it's coming from the mind. But it's nothing to do with your core essence. The mila, the quality of b'chol moedecha, level 1, is that it's your core being, but it's only in your heart because it's due to your natural experience with God. What he's going to say now is going to sound very counterintuitive. He's saying the deeper level of b'chol moedecha, you need your mind because you want it to be a truly internalized experience, not just due to your wiring. Because the first level of B'chol Meidecha, we said the mind is only there to remind you. Like I said, you're sitting here, your loved one, someone tells you. The Seichel is telling you to remind you that this is your natural you. In the higher level of B'chol Meidecha, the Seichel is not creating the emotion, but it means that you're completely involved in it. So your whole being is now. In other words, in level 1 of B'chol Meidecha, the love is a deep love, but still the natural you. It's because that's who you are. That's the essence of who you are. Chol Avavcha B'chol Nafshecho is not about who you are, it's about what you need. So your identity is intact. B'chol Meidecha is bittul, but it's a bittul that now I've come home. But is your whole being now ready to be part and one with your home, with godliness? And he's going to say that the Amokis HaSeichel now, where you use your mind. Remember, the big question we all had was, when who is experiencing the Histaklus in Metzach, gazing at the Metzach? Is it Chacham and Bina because the cognitive has lifted the subjective human being to experience higher than they are? Or is the emotions lifting Bina? Because he said, Shlach Tishlach Haseim, he said the emotions. And I think what he's coming to do here is that they both feed each other. You need the mind to take you to a place that's beyond the mind, and you need the emotions because the emotions is the very core essence of who you're connected with godliness.
Instead of Machen over Midas, this is Midas over Machen, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's where he's going here with this. So it's quite fascinating. He's basically coming to say the following. Moichin leads you to a place that's beyond the subjective. But Moichin is not the essence of who you are. It's only an instrument. Midas, on the other hand, is the essence of who you are. Like we said, mushrish, but that essence is all the way rooted in godliness. Without Moichin, your natural emotions can't get there. They stay in their own place. So you need the Moichin to mature the emotions to get to a place that's beyond subjective interest. And then in turn, the Moichin now takes you to that place, and then the emotions reveal the core connection of the emotions to God, and then you have the strength of both of them. In the first level of B'chol Moichin, you only have the core emotions. The Moichin are not involved in that. In the Chol Nafshecho, you only have the Eser Sfiris. You're not in Keser. You're not involved with the core connection. You're involved with God's relationship with us on our terms, like Mamala Kalam. So I would even say the following: Chol Nafshecho is like Mamala Kalam. The first level of B'chol Moichin is like Sevav Kalam, beyond. And B'chol level, second level of B'chol Moichin is where Atzmus connects both. So you have both your very faculties and your being, because the mind and the emotions are all involved, have led you to the place where your emotions are fundamentally one with godliness. But you cannot begin with that, because God created the world in a way that we do not feel that connection. So you can feel the connection, but not use your mind. So then it would be like in a way, like without Chabad Chassidus, it's the core, like the Baal Shem Tov taught about the Etzem and Neshama connects to the Etzem of the godliness. But you want it also being part of your whole being. So the mind works to do that. So it's an interesting twist here. The mind leads you beyond your subjectivity. The emotions is your experience. Once the mind trains the emotions to go beyond its subjectivity, the emotions reveal something the mind doesn't have, which is that this is the core essence of who you are. Mushish, like he said, that Hashrosha Atzmis. Where were the words he used? The words Hashrosha Atzmis. Yeah, top of page 1243. Hashrosha Pshuta Shebenefesh. That's what I believe he's going to be saying here.
So without the mind, you still Zobe Atiko.
Yeah, but that's only be'etzem. It's not in any gilidik way. Zoz mushash achid v'talya, but ba'atika achid v'talya. But that's the shadish. That's like saying, as I said, the yesh hanivra is mushash and the yesh ha'amiti. But that's not enough. You now need the work to reveal that and to connect it. You see what I'm saying? I think a good way to understand it is with the yesh and oir. Yesh hanivra comes straight from atzmus mitzvah atzmuse. But the Yesh Aniva is completely Aniva Afsiate. Emotions, though they're rooted in very high levels, but they ultimately focus on themselves. That's what they are. So you need the moichin to train the emotions to not focus on yourself, focus on the source, and then the emotions you reveal their very core connection. Basically, it's like this: the emotions start subjective, self-interest. The moichin teach you to become more objective and less self-interest. Then you learn that the emotions' true self-interest and subjectivity is its connection with God, not with its own needs. That's the best way I would sum it up. How's that sound? I believe that's what he's saying here. You heard what I said? You want me to repeat it?
Sound right. Advorim amukim.
Yeah, I think that's what he's coming to say. The emotions start, because remember, the whole thing comes in context of mutfa, murgish, muskel. We start off natural, behavioral, reflexive. We grow, our emotions start growing. The cognitive mind trains the emotions to be a mensch. I mean, that's essentially what maturity is. But then the midas become midas sichlim. They become bottled. They don't have even a hergish. Like you spoke in chokhmah, they don't have a hergish. You don't even margish asatzmi. You're completely absorbed in something higher. But now he's adding one more thing, that the emotions are actually rooted in that higher state, but they don't know it. Yeah, I'm more I say, the more I'm convinced that's what his pshat is here.
Is this summary you just gave over? You're giving a preview of the last part we're gonna read now in this coming paragraph.
It's a combination. It's part of the last part, but also based on the flow.
What we already learned. Yeah.
I'm combining the two. Because when you start reading the next part, if you didn't have what I just said,
get
the whole thing's confusing. Suddenly he's talking about moichin again. I thought we went beyond moichin. So that's why I think it goes back to what we've been discussing, the moichin affecting the midas and the midas affecting the moichin. That whole issue. That, he kept saying in the last few pages, he keeps saying that Bina is elevated through midas. Before he said that Bina and Chachma are training the midas. So I think that plus this paragraph seems to be where it's going. Now, remember, the Rebbe Rashab may say this explicitly, but there comes a point. I have always said, let's learn and then we'll see. But there is a point sometimes you have to analyze it, because if not, it will be completely lost. So I do think this is going to play itself out still. Look, if you look, this goes another good few pages till the whole picture is filled. I just think this is just because without it, it's going to be very difficult to read. I also wanted to say, since I didn't know if you're here, Yitzchak, the question you asked on when was it, Friday, where it was a very good question. Though I answered it briefly, the question about, that seemingly etzem hanefesh should be beyond pain and beyond any all these things that we're talking about. So I stand by my answer. I just wanted to acknowledge that it is a good question, and but the main point difference is that we're not talking about the completely beyond. We ultimately are talking, as I said Friday, in the human experience of things that touch the core. Like when we say Yom Kippur touches the core essence of you, you can say, what do you mean touch the core essence? The core essence is a chelik elikam and mal mamish. It doesn't need to be touched, but it does need to be touched because we need to experience it. The very fact that we were born with a divine soul doesn't mean that we fulfill the purpose. The purpose is adira b'tachtenim, that even as the soul is manifest and concealed in the body and the animal soul and all the challenges we have in life, we reveal that core connection. I just wanted to add that little twist, which is relevant to what we're discussing now as well. But I think that's what he's going to say. The thing is like this. I was going to read it all, but it's already a little late. I have busy days now before Rosh Hashanah, so unless someone has questions, feel free to ask, because I'm not going to read this whole paragraph now. It's going to be too much. But I think with what we just said now, when next time we learn, which will be on Thursday, right? I'll obviously go over this whole thing again.
You said it very right. I think that Rabbi Rashab is adding here that when we're talking about moichin now, it's not the moichin that we are used to, but a different kind of a moichin.
Yeah, for sure. there's no question the moichin here is about what we said earlier about that. The moich. Remember, I gave a whole elaboration on what moichin is according to Chassidus. It's not about intelligence. It's about experiencing something greater than you are. In other words, being able to rise above subjectivity to experience the divine. Because the why God had created intelligence was there to be a bridge between the subjective human being and a divine experience, which is so far apart. So Moichin leads us. There's no question he's talking about the higher level, but we'll read it more patiently. And right now I'm not going to be able to go, I really need to read it slowly. Moichin de Gadlus. No question. I mean, the Rebbe Rashab is really bringing together a lot here, a lot. And I think if you look at the pages, I'm just looking myself right now, a good next 5-6 pages is when he finally finishes and ties it all up together. So clearly there's a lot more to go through, but I think this is the direction. A lot to review here. Psychosakol,
Rabbi Jacobson.
It's like a treasure hunt. You have to keep looking at all the different key words that the Rebbe Rashab drops, like Psychos Halev and Psychos Hakol and Dibur. I think all of it comes to build this puzzle. But clearly we're seeing something here which is quite fascinating, really giving a full picture of how a simple child becomes a fully blown divine entity. That's really what it comes down to here, through Moichin and Midas. Go ahead.
On page 45, it says there that that the heart can contain it, and then it goes that it spreads to all the Esser Kochos, and then it goes on and says in that line, it says, and then it comes to Modecha, and the heart isn't able to contain it, klal, at all. So my question to you was, is that meaning that it's like progressing? It's in the heart, contain it, then it spreads to the Esser Kochos, and now it goes even higher to Modecha, and therefore there's an overspill. The way I was looking at it is that it still fills all your Esser Kochos, including your heart, contains it, and your Kochos code, and then there's a part like extends to a level that can't be contained by the Esser Kochos and at all. But there, when it says it can't hold it at all, is that a different? There would it indicate, imply that it's not that it's being filled up and then there's a spillover that it can't contain it. It seems there that it would be saying that it can't contain it at all. It's a different kind of experience completely that isn't able to be experienced b'chlal in the heart when it uses that term b'chlal.
Well, my understanding is, if you're going to use the river example that he uses, there's the river as it flows regularly. That's b'chol avavcha. B'chol nafshecho, when the river comes all the way to the banks of the river, due to the melting of snow and great rain, rain and so on. And b'chol meidecha is where the river overflows, literally beyond, like you just said, cannot be contained by the heart. What the meaning behind that is that as long as the midas, the lev, the heart, is defined and controlled by the mind, it will always be within the banks of the river. As soon as you're getting into the etzem hanefesh, meaning a very core love that we have with God there, which is not driven by any logical parameters, that's when you're dealing with overflowing, and the love cannot contain it. So that, how does it express itself? Through deep thirst, like he says, deep longing, or deep connection that goes beyond the rational love, that the cognitive love or the rational love driven by b'chol avavcha b'chol nafshecha. So like he says here, Shamalecha nafshi, Kamalecha psari, that you're in a state that's l'mayla mitam v'das, and you're in a very deep passion and excitement. Like I said, like coming home, like suddenly you're connecting with the one that you most love. In this case, you're coming to the core connection of you and God. It's still not the highest level, but it's beyond the cholav. That's how I would explain it.
Okay, so and that thirst is going to be able to be quenched eventually.
You always remember the house always wins, Eliezer. You're not going to get.
And who's the house here?
God.
But the house wants us to win.
No, well, you'll feel winning when your thirst is deep. It doesn't have to be quenched for you to feel as a winner. That's the point. It may be beautiful to be able to always feel Ein Sof and feel that there's always more. You just we're not trained to think like that. We think, I want to fill my bank account and that's it, But
well, I experienced it a little when I got your 2 chapters from the curriculum. So I got
Mazel
it.
tov.
My thirst.
Mazel tov.
My thirst is very strong right now for the rest of the chapters, but because it's no question that this is a transformational work, a very big transformational work, Rabbi Jacobson. There's a lot of things I want to comment on, but overall, it's the difference between you're really creating a curriculum rather than a paper, like a book. It's a curriculum. I never experienced that, meaning that it's the difference between somebody giving a person a good story. This is how I'm relating to it. And, let's make that into a play, or let's make it into a movie script or something. And you're writing the actual script, right? And you're telling the teachers how they should handle the material itself. That's a whole different dimension. It's not just presenting the material. It's how to explain it, how to develop it, how to present it. It's like, I feel like you're behind the scenes here, directing a curriculum, an important curriculum. And I love your idea about your 4 questions, by the way. I would think you might want to, though, just like you said about the Passover 4 questions, that you could maybe make that as a theme at each chapter, the 4 questions of Geula, the 4, just ask the 4 questions. It was I thought a very important hop, but it's really an amazing thing. But
we'll talk more. I'm happy to talk about it.
Can I ask a question about the material?
Hold on, one second. Before that, let me just end this recording here.
Oh,
so we're stopping here, the bottom of page 1245. We're up to the Ayin Beis, the second level of B'chol Ma'it.